Good day to you, TFT viewers. It's a pleasure to have you here with us. My name is Ken Gonzalez, and I'm going to be your host, guide, Sherpa, whatever you want to call me for this particular session of TFT13. And I'm pleased to be able to introduce to you Mr. Sean McClean. Sean, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, yes, thanks very much, Ken. Looking forward to this. Yes, as Ken said, my name is Sean McClean. I want to be introducing and talking through my topic with all of those who will be watching this. I'm kind of excited about that.
Okay, good. So, for those of you that are watching online, feel free to tweet and or use the various social media outlets to ask questions and tell us what you think about what we're talking about. If you're on Twitter, use the hashtag TFT13. That is the magic one that we're tracking to see, hey, what do people think about? Well, that's what we're using. I've got my tweet deck running. It'll provide us some raw material for the Q&A session to follow. And even if you're not watching this live, it's the gift that keeps on giving. You can go back and see the comments and interact with us directly. So please make maximum use of the opportunity. It's well worth it. So with that, Sean, I'll hand it over to you. Have fun, and we'll pick up for the Q&A in a little while.
Great. Thanks very much, Ken. Well, I'm super excited to have the opportunity to share this with everyone. And I really wanted to take just a minute to kind of go through this. I need, of course, a minute to see if I can bring my slides up, and hopefully you guys can see this now. My topic for TFT13 that this is something that I feel super passionate about, so I'm mostly just excited to get the idea to share ideas. And as Ken said, my goal in running through this presentation is to get people thinking, because I want to hear what other people have to say about this and to start a conversation and discussion. In the world of ITSM, I think that this is something that probably should be thought about, talked about, because that's how we'll get new things happening and things kind of shaken up. So I wanted to talk about rock, paper, scissors, lizard, who.
Hey, Sean?
Yes, sir.
We're seeing your PowerPoint client as opposed to presentation mode. Perfect.
Okay, I feel like one of those eye doctors. Is this view better or worse? Better?
It's great. Back at you.
Good. Well, anyway, my topic today is rock, paper, scissors, lizard, who. I wanted to talk about what's changing IT's stuck paradigm of training and certification. Now, in terms of my background, I've been involved in the IT service management space for 15 years or so. I've been involved in technical training and certification for just almost 2 decades. And training and learning is something that's just constantly my source of inspiration and interest. I also like picking up little bits and pieces of culture everywhere I go. And so this one kind of threw me into the I got to think more about this and talk more about this. So that's kind of where I want to drive us. We'll talk about what's changing the paradigm of training and certification in IT. But first, I wanted to kind of throw us back into this. I can't assume that you all are familiar with this idea, but I'll tell you, probably most people are familiar with the game of rock, paper, scissors. If you were a child playing that game, you're probably well familiar with it and grew out of it pretty quickly. But suddenly, in recent years, the idea became hip again when a couple of people were hip and cool and trendy. When someone threw in 2 little extra items, a lizard and a Spock. And so suddenly this idea of rock, paper, scissors became a whole lot more trendy. I threw down here, wherever possible, I'll try to bring in pointers or resources. And this one's just a Wikipedia resource that tells a little bit about how rock, paper, scissors became rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock. Gosh, that's hard for me to say. I had to practice a couple of times to get used to being able to say that out loud. But at the end of the day, that little bit of lizard Spock kind of threw out what used to be a child's game and made it very much a part of our culture again. If you read through the Wikipedia article, what you'll find is that ultimately that it kind of became a bit of a new nerd culture when it got thrown in. It became popularized again when it got brought through the Big Bang Theory. But actually, it was out before that. A gentleman by the name of Sam Cos you can find that information out on Wikipedia to kind of see the origins of it. What this has to do with us and where it's going in IT, I want to talk about that, and that's kind of where I want to lead things. Essentially, we had a game that was old and kind of got spiced up again or disrupted or broken in by adding a couple new variables. And I want to see where the new variables are in IT training and certification and what that's going to do to IT. So in the next few minutes, what I'm going to talk about are those pieces. I'm going to talk about IT, and then I'm going to talk about disruption and why that's become kind of hip and new, at least in my opinion. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about certification and training, because if ever there was an area that could use a little bit of disruption, it probably in my world is training and certification. Last, what I want to do is take all those pieces together and talk about where's our lizard spot? What's the thing that disrupted this common mentality that we've been in for seemingly forever with IT certification and IT training. And then I want to kind of take that out into its next logical conclusion and talk about where do you think this is going? And my hope is that at the end of this, when you go through, if you're reviewing this or if you have feedback, it'll get you thinking and going, geez, I wonder where it is going. And then the next step is to come up with some ideas and start sharing those ideas in our community, because that's important. And I think that's kind of what this is, the whole point of this being all about, shaking things up and sort of seeing what distills and what new ideas come out of it. So if we just look at the variables, maybe we'll see where our lizard Spock is. So what's in it? I can't stop but assume that if you're watching this or if you're participating, you've got your own view of what IT is. To me, and I'll be sharing information that I've learned or picked up along the way, but I also want to share my own thoughts or feelings on this. So to me, I really love the fact that when we look at technology, we see it as the forefront. So if you look at information technology, on the one hand, it's kind of at the leading edge, right? We always think of that technology aspect taking us out on the leading edge. But if you look at our cultural perception of IT, and again, I'll have to pull back to a cultural reference for any of you who've picked up the IT Crowd, that TV show that makes joking references to things like you can break the internet, you cannot Google, another hard one to say. But those types of pieces. So on the front end, we say IT or information technology, so it's at the forefront. But at the other side, where are we? All those TV shows and cultural icons tend to think of us as in the basement. I saw a really great cartoon the other day. It was a picture of the Death Star, and they said, you're here. And if you were the IT department, then where you'd be is at the very bottom. This idea, it kind of sets up an interesting dichotomy, because on the one hand, we're way leading, and at the other, we're kind of thought of as down the bottom. So we definitely need to have some things shaken up. That brings me to this idea of disruption. And this, again, very hip idea, very cool idea, very big these days. It's big in business, but it's certainly big in IT. And it would make sense. If you look at a group of people that are sometimes perceived as in the basement, maybe a little shaking up would be good for us. So I'm bringing across a couple of ideas that I found interesting, and these books and resources that I point out here are by no means new. They've been out for the information on the Medici effect or the Blue Ocean strategy. Those are popular business books that have been around for 10 or 15 years now. But there's an idea that I think comes out of them with regard to what drives disruption, and that's a very important idea. When we look at them, in particular, Johansson's book, The Medici Effect, talks about this idea, and I wanted to paint it out here. My graphics are not meant to be, super eye-captivating. It's the concept that's interesting to me. And that is, if you pick a discipline, like biology, to drive the discipline any farther, you'd have to go and study all of the broad stuff at the base of biology, and then excel your education and continue going on to learn all the way up to the most refined pieces of biology and then drive it a little bit further. So you've got to climb that mountain to push the peak just a little tiny bit further. And the higher the peak gets, the pointier it gets, and the harder it is to create any new innovation in a discipline. So you move over to another discipline like architecture, something that's been around for eons, right? As long as we've had buildings, we've had architectural concepts. If we want to drive the discipline of architecture any further, we've got to learn all of the basics first and climb that mountain and drive that peak up. Well, Johansson proposed in the Medici effect this idea that the really interesting opportunity is it's so hard to drive one discipline up. Rather than do that, there's a ton of space in between those peaks and in between those disciplines. So Johansson's idea was if we kind of went halfway up biology and leapt across and went halfway over architecture, there's a whole opportunity of new area, new stuff, new places to change things. Now, in a field like IT, where we think that we're always out to do new things and drive things forward, having this concept in our heads would be a hugely important and valuable thing. Now, the blue ocean strategy, kind of similar ideas. They say we're looking for the areas to where it's blue ocean or green fields. We're looking for that empty space. So where's our empty space? Well, that sometimes requires a little bit of shaking up the existing paradigm. And that's where we're getting this idea of disruption all the time. We're even if we have to break things to make space in between those mountains, we need to find a way to find that new space. So we have IT, we have disruption. Let's talk about that other place, the place to me that could use some disruption, and that's education and training. And I hate to say this in some ways because I'm an educator and trainer. I love everything about teaching. On the other hand, teaching hasn't changed much, at least in my opinion, since Aristotle was doing it just a few years ago, it seems like. But if we go all the way back to that far, essentially the same concepts exist. Someone lectured, someone listened, someone learned. Now, somewhere along the line, we started saying we wanted to gain some way to mark those learning events. So we got into things like the high school diploma and the college degree and the certification. But at the end of the day, those diplomas and degrees and certifications, they all follow the same path. Take the class, prep the test, earn the certificate. If it's a diploma, take a couple of classes, take several classes, prep the tests, earn the diploma. If it's a college degree, take many classes, different professors, perform the work, prep the tests, earn the degree. All of those things worked well. When you combine that in information technology, something that's moving forward very fast, the high school diploma or the college degree, that process is, a little too slow for a discipline that follows Moore's law. Right? We don't have 4 years to increase our education, but that's okay because we came up with certificates. But at the end of the day, even though it's certificates, it's still the same rock, paper, scissors. It's still take the class, prep the test, earn the cert, which gets a little bit tired after a while. It seems to me, or it feels like to me, we may be doing it online, another way to speed things up. Great. Guess what? Someone talks, someone learns, someone gets a cert or a degree out of it. This model just kind of becomes consistent, which is nice, and I know all the times we're driving for consistency, but where do we disrupt something like education and training? Personally, I think maybe we're at a point now, a really interesting point, and particularly IT's in a place to kind of reap the benefits and also see some of the pain points as we move through this, to get a little lizard Spock thrown in there, something to shake up our rock, paper, scissors, or rock, scissors, paper, however you want to look at it. In this model that we talk about, this idea of earning the certificate, ultimately that certificate is really kind of focused on the earner. We wanted to keep those certificates and we wanted to earn those certificates some way to mark them, to mark our success in that learning environment. So let's talk about that a little bit. That way to mark success in our environment, certification is differentiation. Diplomas and college degrees were the same thing. Ultimately, they were ways, and historically, that we were able to mark ourselves as different. We've achieved this learning event. We've accomplished this thing. Now, certificates in our fast-moving world, fast-paced world of IT was a great way to do the same old model. It was just like getting a diploma and just like getting a college degree. It was just faster and more specific. So this gave us a chance to stand out from the crowd and to earn something that stood us out a little bit separately from everybody else. But still, let's talk a little more on that, what that certification meant for us. Still, it's a point in time. Still, it's very fixed. It's typically quantitative. Now we're using the same things that we did in high school and college. You have to take a test and pass the test to earn the cert. So still following the same old model. And since it's focused on the individual, and let's face it, as we go global, there are billions of individuals and quite a few of us all interested in the idea of getting into IT, that fast-paced, fast-moving world. So that thing that was differentiation for us, not so different anymore, and not so much a differentiator anymore. I would assume that some of you are probably familiar with that concept of alphabet soup that we all struggle with. There are just so many certificates and certifications out there in our IT space, and we're already kind of an acronymisk, great word there, I think. We're already kind of an acronym-full discipline anyway. So we add certificates to it, it really does become alphabet soup. You may have CC, MC, MCD, A, CTT, MO, doesn't matter. Those certificates after a while start to cloud the field, and it becomes no longer very useful in creating that differentiation that we keep looking for. So we have IT, a very fast and forward-moving area. We have the concept of disruption, sometimes to create some new space in there. We need to shake things up a little bit. IT kind of did by shrinking out what was a college degree into short time-frame certificates. Helped us focus and helped us keep pace with the fast-moving world, the fast-moving discipline of technology. But at the end of the day, it didn't really change much. And at the end of the day, because it's focused on the earner, because it's based on a point in time, and because now everybody has some kind of certificate, it's not doing what it was initially set out to do, which is differentiate us. So I think at this point, it's time to start thinking about flipping things around. Where's our disruption? Where's our lizard Spock? What are the things that are going to change this rock, paper, scissors game that we're so familiar with? Well, one of those areas that I want to look at, or three of these areas that we're going to talk a little bit about to me, where I think things will get changed out, are gamification, badges, and MOOCs. But any one of those disruptors to our plan, really at the heart of it, we've got to look at those disruptors or those things that are shaking our world from the angle of the people that are doing the learning and the hirers that are looking for those special people to bring on board within our discipline. So the people that are learning, they're still looking to learn. They're still looking to differentiate themselves, and they're still looking for ways to prove that they're somehow a little better than the rest of the field. Hirers are kind of doing the same thing. They're still looking for good talent. They're still looking how to find in that massive alphabet soup the right person. And so we keep looking for what's that way that we're going to go to get those people. And the hirers aspect, I think, is an important one. Always in the past, when we look at certification, we tend to look at it from the perspective of the certificate earner. And I think when we flip that on its ear and we say, let's look at certificates from the perspective of the hirer, it's a very confusing picture. I know that you may know what your certification means, but I'm trying to hire somebody and there's 50 of you and all of you have a bunch of letters after your name. I don't know which one of them is more important. I just need one of you specialized to do the job that I want. So instead of looking at this issue from the perspective of the certification earner, as we look at these disruptors, I think it might help also to keep in mind the person doing the hiring, the person doing the seeking collaborative resources, and those people that are going to stand out in the crowd. Those hirers also are looking from the perspective that we need to change that idea of a fixed event of learning. IT is always moving forward. So the hirers, the organizations in our discipline, we've got to change that model that we have of once you earn your certificate, you're done. Once you earn your diploma, you're finished. Education doesn't end anymore. So we need to, the hirers, the organizations need to start really driving people towards this learning and growing model that doesn't ever stop. Because IT is not going to ever stop, or at least we hope not. So let's break down some of these disruptors. Gamification. And throughout, I've just put some resources and people out here that I've drawn into where I've gotten information. So gamification, it's not just for kids anymore. One of the things I wanted to bring out when we talk about gamification, there's a definition of gamification in the Wikipedia, so I'll let people look that one up as well. But essentially, the idea of gamification is adding game-like elements to help motivate people and solve problems in the workplace, in business, or to resolve other goals. So when we look at gamification, we're trying to change the model of the learner. We're trying to get them motivated and engaged to help us solve problems, to help us accomplish things. It's used as a motivational tool to encourage people, and it's really making a difference in our training world. Really what it flips on its ear is it changes the nature of the training and the rock, paper, scissors of the train, prep, earn the certificate, which kind of is a model where you walk into the classroom and someone does their lecture for you, and you have to prep or study in whatever way it is for you to earn the cert. When we look at gamification, we start getting different ways to get the learners involved, and instead of being just a passive person, we're making them participants. We're letting them play the game. So gamification is a real important disruptor, and we're seeing more of it all over the place. So it's not one that you can afford to ignore. Now, in terms of other information about gamification, the idea, I threw down Kevin Worlbach, who's written out some information on, has a book called For the Win, which is applying game concepts to business and other projects and problems. And he does just a fascinating job. He also has a course on Coursera, which is one of the massively open online courses that I'll talk about in a little bit. It's another big disruptor, this idea of a MOOC. But we're also seeing another article that was written out there, and this one I had down. Lawrence Eng was a presenter on this topic and kind of an expert on gamification. He and I had put together an article also with Andy Ho in the idea of badges for education, awareness, and training. The idea is that putting in badges and game concepts into not only learning but in the IT discipline is a great way to kind of drive us forward. So let's talk about another disruptor. So we assume we have this element that now participants are getting engaged and involved. I've got a person I work with, and she's fantastic. Her name's Diane Cunningham, and one of the things that she suggested to me that I just thought was brilliant was she explained to me that she said, you know, Sean, no more in the training environment are you the sage on the stage. Now the idea as we move to gamification is you're the guide on the side. And I love that idea. It was just awesome because instead of being that sage on the stage, when we employ gamification techniques, we're getting participants. And so now you're just facilitating the learning environment, not doing so much lecture as you are getting people engaged. And that helps both learning, but it also helps that idea that it's not a fixed event, it's ongoing. Because as long as people are motivated, they'll keep driving for new learning. Now, let's talk about badges. I love the idea of badges, and I want to extend that out to say badges in portfolios, because really at the end of the day, a certificate, as we said, it's a fixed point in time, so it doesn't help us in our technology-driven world that's constantly moving forward. It's also not very representative of what the person brings. It doesn't differentiate anymore because it's become so overwhelmingly crowded with acronyms. So a certification is a piece of paper that focuses on a fixed point in time, and it doesn't show representationally what it is you do. It also tends to be very quantitative based on tests. We've built into that world and adopted that old model that you have to pass a test to earn your cert. And your cert is back to rock, paper, scissors again. It's the old way of doing things. Well, badges are a little bit different. For starters, badges are iconic. They're pictures of what they represent. So as a hirer, so again, I'm going to take that hirer view rather than the earner view. From a hirer's perspective, when you look at a badge, I can build a badge that is iconic enough that when I look, I know what it is you've done. It's a picture of a computer. Oh, you're probably good with computers. It's a picture of a person shaking hands. Oh, you're probably pretty friendly. I don't have to interpret a bunch of initials. Instead, I can look at a picture. The other element to that iconic aspect of building badges is using a very set structure of badges in a domain, you can create a better picture of a person that I can look at in an instant instead of trying to go back and refer to what does this cert mean and when did you get it and what does it represent for me. So badges are kind of cool there. The other thing that's nice about badges, and we'll notice that certifications are starting to do this too, but badges kind of shake things up because they're not necessarily as test-driven or as quantifiable. If you look at tools like Foursquare, they earn badges for things that you do. But I love that idea of applying that to shake up what we think of as in our fixed world of training and certification for IT. Instead of simply giving a certificate when you pass a test, we can give a badge that's iconic, that represents something you did. Here's something I accomplished in the IT discipline. Here's a badge that represents it. I don't have to have a past test for it. I can actually show experience that way. Now, as I said, certifications are starting to try to catch up. When we look at certain certifications now, in addition to passing tests to earn the cert, you also have to demonstrate experience components. But badges are kind of a little bit ahead of the curve in that, and we can leverage them within IT to shake things up that way. Using domains for badges and splitting badges out to go, hey, this is a badge that demonstrates your experience, this is a badge that demonstrates your knowledge, and this may be a badge that demonstrates your social skills. That kind of a breakout would be iconic. People, a hirer that like any of you here could look and say, I can see the color and the code of the badge and know what your experience is and what your social background is, how liked or not liked you are. And or how many tests you've passed. So I get a fuller picture. So it creates a better way. Instead of separating you, it lets me get a picture of the whole you instead of just a number of letters after your name. So badges are one way to do that. Portfolios are another one. And there's a great article, if you're a LinkedIn or blog reader, you may want to look up Heather Hiles, who wrote a really interesting article very, very recently, past a couple of days, about the idea of bridging education and learning. And essentially what she was saying is we're great at getting endpoints in training and learning events. And those endpoints for us are what? Learn the content, take the test, oh yeah, get the cert. And so she says in our way, we end our learning event by handing out some kind of certification. And she says that one of the things that would be great for us to do is incorporate maybe portfolios that demonstrate your work. So instead of a cert that has a bunch of letters after your name, why don't we start helping transition people from high school to college or from college to the working world by giving them portfolios of experience that they can carry with them and show. So it's much more than letters. It's a here's my work. And those things would help the hirer get a differentiated picture. So, well, let me rephrase that. Instead of looking just to separate yourself from the crowd, that lets me look at the whole you, one picture, by seeing your portfolio of work. And then I can differentiate by seeing the whole person you are rather than here's the letters after your name, which we know these days has started to become so old that it's not necessarily being effective anymore. So this is an area in my world that I think we could use a little bit of lizard Spock to shake up our rock, paper, scissors. A little bit of disruption wouldn't hurt us. So that's badges and portfolios and where I think that's disrupting things. Now, another cool thing I had out there is a resource. If you take a look at openbadges.org, they've got a fantastically interesting site out there, and classic Mozilla, right? It's open source. But essentially what they did is they split badges into the perspective of the earner, the displayer, and the issuing organization. And so they said in our open environment, anyone can go earn a badge. Anyone who wants to can display a badge. So if Facebook or Twitter or anyone can display a badge that we have in our project, and then anyone who wants to issue, as long as you build a consistent set of criteria and a very recognizable and clear methodology that the earners can follow and displayers can use, they can use it. It's a great model, so if you ever want to go look and learn more about this idea, take a look at the openbadges.org or just search on open badges. There's some other interesting things going on there. So that's another disruptor. So we had gamification kind of shaking up our world of IT cert and IT training. We have badges and portfolios kind of starting to come in there. Another example that I think kind of a little representative of badges, but if nothing else proves our need to get out of the current model, is the LinkedIn endorsements. You see all these endorsements, and I go, why would we have these endorsements? Because we need something to shake up the current model. The endorsements thing, I think, is really us recognizing that we need a little disruption here in our world of how do I differentiate besides certifications. So now I want to get to this last one, and by far it's it's the one I'm most interested in, to me, is terms of disruptors, because I think this is a game changer for everything and everybody. I started following this information and writing about this information about 2.5 years ago, I think. I first heard about this, and someone had written an article and said, this changes everything. I think it was in Business World. But anyway, they talk about MOOC. A MOOC is a massively open online course. Now, when we say massive, we go, well, so what? It's just online training, right? And I would say, no, it's completely different, but in some interesting ways. So people that are interested in MOOCs are not just a couple of crackpots and oddballs in strange places. We're talking about, a couple of universities and colleges that are interested in these college-level courses. And by a couple, I mean people like Harvard, MIT, University of Edinburgh, Brown University, just to name a couple, Wharton School of Business. So these are not small players in our world of what we think of in education. And if they're chasing down this idea of massively open online courses, it's something we should know about. So what do we mean by massive, and why is that any different? In a typical college course, if you take a freshman college biology course, you may have 100 people, maybe 200. If we're going to go crazy, let's say 500 people in that one college course. If we go online, we can say, wow, we can train a lot more people. In an online course, maybe we'll train, let's get really crazy. We'll say in a classic online course, we'll train 800 people. Now that's kind of stretching things. To do an online course that trains 800 people in a college level course, kind of reaching. Well, a massively open online course, they don't do 800, they do 80,000. They've started leveraging these courses. They do 80,000, 120,000. I think one of the biggest ones I've seen so far is 125,000 students. They're free, or freemium, and we can talk on freemium if you have questions about that. I'd love to get into that area. But so these courses by massive, we're talking 80,000, 100,000 people. What does that do for us? How is teaching different when you have 80,000 people? Well, among other things, if you have 80,000 people, obviously you have to know dropout rates are not going to be, retention is not going to be what you expect in a classic course. 90% would drop out. 100,000 students, let's say 99% drop out. That's still an awful lot of people that got in. And all of those people that dropped out, that doesn't mean they didn't learn anything. It just means they didn't complete it. So if you can put 100,000 people in a college level course and get them trained, that says something. And that's it. But it also means there's some other information we get out of there. And that's what you see on the slide that I've kind of been building up to. Massive students mean massive data. And what can you do with massive data? You can actually start getting predictive with the teaching. If I have 800 students, I can't really do a whole lot to change what I'm teaching. But if I have 80,000 students in the same class, I can use predictive data to determine information that would tell me when are these students going to drop out, which students are going to have problems with which content. That's enough data that I can start really predicting a group of people and then starting to tailor other supporting training materials to make sure that they're successful. That's huge. That's something that someone like myself, a trainer or a teacher, worth gold. Because now I know that all of the people in my class will have the light bulb effect. Because I can predict when they're not. And that thing that we have in the classroom where you go, wow, I'm not going to get this. We can get past that. What does this mean for IT? Come on, let's think about it. If you're going to be able to shake up the world and get more people on board of a technology that's at the forefront of our discipline, let's get 80,000 people in there and get them ramped up. Oh, well, geez, Sean, only 1,000 of those people will make it. That's still a lot of people in a quick push. The other thing that we're seeing with massively open courses or massively open online courses, sorry, I get it confused, is that it creates there's some new teaching methods that have had to been created. And the major one is peer evaluation. Now, I don't want to kill too much more time. I know I've been talking about a bunch of things, but I wanted to bring this out. There's a great TED Talk by Daphne Kohler, who's one of the founders, I believe, of the Coursera, one of the organizations that offers MOOCs through a variety of different colleges. But her talk, one of the things she talked about was they had to come up with a different way to give college-level learning events. And some of them were tests, of course, that could be automatically graded, but they needed papers and things that you would write in a college class. And so what they did was they had the essays written, and they create essentially a multi-step process. I write my paper, but I don't get to receive a grade until I do a blind review of 3 other people. Now, that's something you could not do unless the course was massive. If there's 10 people in the class, blind review is not going to work too well. But if we're all interested in learning the material and we're motivated, and I won't get to see your feedback until I grade 3 of you, and there are 80,000 of you, chances are pretty good that my evaluation will be a pretty good evaluation. And if there are 3 other ones, I don't mean good like easy, I mean good like a pretty accurate and useful one. And what in the TED Talk that I've got listed down there, what Daphne Kohler points out is they ran through this, and their statistics were that the peer evaluations scored just about what the professors would have scored on these students that completed the class. So that peer evaluation methodology is working out great, and then allows the professors to do what they do best, which is generate new learning and drive those pinnacles of knowledge higher. So I think that kind of talks a lot about the 3 disruptors that I was interested in talking and bringing to our world of IT training and certification. Badges and portfolios, which we'll kind of get rid of to some degree. Certifications, I don't want to say they'll get rid of, but they change the nature of the learning event now. Gamification, which also helps change the nature of the IT learning event. Instead of sitting and having someone lecture at you, now you've got elements of a game where you're motivated to be an active participant, and you're starting to drive things yourself. And that person who used to be that, again, to use my friend Diane's quote, that sage on the stage, now you're going to be the guide on the side. And you're just going to help them participate in this element that's interesting and exciting and participative to them. And then the massively online open course model, where now instead of just offering this to small groups of people and trying to churn them around, we're doing it for thousands and tens of thousands of them at once, which gives us more data to improve the training. So those are big disruptors. And now I'm getting towards a part where I want to kind of start to wrap things up. And so I get to this idea and go, okay, well, that's great. We have IT, they're moving forward faster and always faster. And yet at the same point, we're kind of at the basement of the organization, and we need some shaking up. We've adopted what has been a very classic education and learning model that's been going on pretty much the same way with rock, paper, scissors. Take the class, earn the cert, or take the class, prep the test, earn the cert. Rock, paper, scissors, same stuff all the time. So we need something to change that world of IT certification that we have, and so that's where we are now. IT will continue to churn and change. So we can't use the certification method where we say that learning is an isolated event. Both the hirers need to set up strategy to drive us towards continued and ongoing learning to make us motivated. But the certification earners or the learners now need to be active participants and need to start driving forward. That's always been the case, but I think these tools that we're talking about, badges and MOOCs and gamifications, are going to make that happen faster. They're going to shake things up. Speaking of shaking things up, we know that disruption is hip. You know, it's the new cool thing. But what does it mean for us? Well, it means we need to look between the classic tools that we're used to. We need to look in between certs and classes and things and look into those things that are new, like badges and portfolios, and start thinking about them and get engaged in this conversation. And MOOCs matter. I really think that that's going to be something that's unavoidable. What does it mean for IT? It means now that people can choose their education and start picking courses. I think as you start seeing more of this, the other new one that's happening with MOOC that is the next new thing is predictive training. Based on all the information I have on you and the training that you're taking and where you are, not just what can I adapt in this course, but what course are you going to use next? what's the next best thing for your career? Based on what I've seen and what badges and experience you've earned, perhaps I can get to a point when I can better start predicting what you need next to progress. So those are some of the things that we need to think about, kind of what it all means. And that kind of wraps up the content that I wanted to cover. So that brings me back to, I hope that I've introduced what will be, I think, the lizard Spock in our continuing idea of rock, paper, scissors and our classic model of training and cert. My information's out there on Google Plus and LinkedIn and Twitter is all Sean P. McClean, so I hope that I'll be pretty easy to find. I want to thank you all for your time, and I hope that this sponsors some thought and participation.
You had one of the, from my perspective, and I have a distinct fondness for things related to training and development. Probably one of the most fascinating presentations of TFT13 for me. So,
okay.
and personally satisfying. So I consider myself very lucky that I'm able to be on the link with you and ask you a couple questions. So hopefully I'll do that justice.
Great.
But anyway,
thank you so much.
So let's, I've got a couple ones that I want to run past you. So we had talked about badges and certificates and like this. So let me play devil's advocate for a minute, especially from an employer's or potential employer's perspective. Certificate of attendance versus a certification, like say the ITIL Foundation certificate.
Right.
Why do I care? And let me set that question up a little bit.
Okay.
There's a rise of something that my friend Ian Clayton coined called certificate-centric consulting. And that's where somebody goes and gets a certificate and all of a sudden comes back with a level of expertise, able to jump tall buildings, and, well, they try in several bounds, but ultimately kind of fall short. Where there's a level of expectation that gets set out of participating in that kind of event, only to be, well, disappointed that, you know, it's a level of expectation setting as opposed to a failure of the course itself, like to impart some of the knowledge.
Right.
So in that case, the certificate and taking the test really isn't all that important to me. I just want to know that my people actually went, sat in the chair, and, you know, paid their dues.
Right.
Is there what do you think about that, or what's the flaw in the thinking, or why should I care?
Are you going to say, well, I was going to say, is there a badge for that instead of just an app for that?
Could there be? I think so.
Yeah. I think to me, the thing that's these days, that idea of you know, crossing the T and dotting the I, as long as you've been there, you've shown up, then that's good enough. But we're getting past that. People need everybody's driving to stay ahead, and part of that is being a part of the learning environment. And it's really interesting to me. You know, there's you know, I how do I put this? Not to take a skeptical view on things, since we're going to refer to some of the names that we've been referring to. There's that one desire to be somewhat skeptical and say, well, those people are just going to sit and take the class and get their certificate of participation, or they're going to just cross, you know, they'll cross the T and say, hey, I showed up, and then they won't have any knowledge from it. And we can look at that and say that's kind of where, that's kind of, I think, to me, what certification has driven us towards is, what do I need to do to get that piece of paper? But we're finding those models aren't working, and people are driving, hirers in particular, they're looking for that extra something. We always talk, you know, what's that special sauce? What do I do to figure out who that person is? And we're starting to resort, you can see it everywhere. We need it. Hirers are looking for that thing that makes you different. And what I'm saying is, it's going to be found somewhere. I can't look at 1,000 resumes. And in our global environment, I'm not looking at 1,000. I'm looking at 10,000, 20,000. The piece of paper doesn't represent as much anymore. And so my constant, or your constant challenge as a hirer, is to go, how do I find that differentiator? If you had to interview every one of those 10,000 people, you're never going to get there. But if we start seeing badge principles and portfolio principles, it does put it puts a little more responsibility on both parties. But that's the world we live in today, right? The earners are going to need to be more motivated to learn, and they are more than ever. When you put us in a group that there's now, instead of competing for a job between 10 people, I'm competing with a job between 100,000 people. Some people are going to say, well, I just need more paper after my name. But that's not working anymore, and hirers are starting to look for that. You look at companies all over talking about what they do to get and retain talent. And to me, my colleague here talks a bunch about, he and I have put together and done a lot of talking about the idea of, there's the social sphere, because I know to me it's a three-legged pyramid. There's the social sphere. Are you a good guy? When my manager hired me, I got a great kick out of this. He said, frankly, I knew less about IT service management and more about training. So I went down the hall and I said, have you ever heard of this guy, Sean? And he said, honestly, it was pretty interesting to me. A couple of people had. So he was looking for the social component. So there's that element of things. And then there's the knowledge element, which is the part that you're saying. Did you attend the class or did you know things? And then there's that third aspect of the triangle to me, which is experience. If you look at all three of them together, number one, you can have more of one than the other. You can have a ton of certification, which is kind of what you were talking about. Ton of certification, but no real experience. You can go the other way, which can be just as bad. I have a ton of experience, and the last time I took a new class was 25 years ago, and I don't need any new education. I still do things in Fortran, and Fortran works for me, so I'm not going to learn anything new. No. So I can look at any one of those pieces, but if you look at it as a whole, or both of those, I'm very experienced, I'm very knowledgeable, and I'm not the kind of person you want to talk to. So to me, if we look at those, how can a hirer see all three of those dimensions quickly? When I go, badges. It's all about the badges. If you look at that, I could create badges. If you look at tools like Stack, look at Stack Overflow. We have badges and accomplishments for how well people are. Look at Twitter and LinkedIn. There are ways to recognize people for how good they are at being social. And we're starting to get quickly recognizable, iconic badge ways to see that, as well as if we could just get badges to recognize experience, then I could get the whole you and say, hey, you've got a lot of experience, but not a lot of drive for new knowledge. Or you've got a lot of new knowledge, but not a lot of experience. And then I could pick and choose and say, I want a guy who has all three. Or I could say for this job, I really want a smart guy that's not very social. So, it depends.
No, that's a great answer. I really like where you went with that, and it leads me to a follow-on question. Because one of the things that I write about in my blog is that most people don't know it about me, but I'm actually a flight instructor.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I actually have a bit of a different take on training and education than some people do. And my training and education experience goes back a long way, having lectured at Cal State Fullerton and done a lot of various things in the area. So I'm not a newcomer to the business by any stretch of the imagination.
Okay.
But that, getting back to why I'm setting this up, is that at any given point in time, as educators, we're always looking at the development of knowledge, skills, and abilities. So the three are at play.
Right.
And the traditional programs that we're used to encountering in the IT service management space pretty much revolve around knowledge only.
Right.
We don't have a lot of good tools to be able to give us access to, how do we develop skills? And, oh boy, don't even bring up the topic of developing new abilities.
Right.
Because what would that look like? Because if we can't describe it, we certainly don't have a prayer of being able to get engaged on that level. From what you've been talking about, help me understand what we can do to start shifting. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and not do the knowledge-oriented stuff, but how can we start bringing more focus on the development of skills and abilities?
Oof. I'd love to see more about it. To me, I think some of it is measuring, and we're throwing historical stuff around, and we know the whole, you change the behavior of what you measure. You go, well, how do you measure experience, and how do you measure abilities, and how do you measure the social content? When Lawrence and I were talking about this third dimension, because we went, when you hire somebody, it's not just skills, but there's that extra something, and that was where we got into the social component. And that was, when I talked to my manager and we had that discussion, he said, you just ask people. And I'm going, yeah, but hirers will want to find that element. When we can find ways to measure that, which we are, and that's why I go back to the badge thing again. My friends, I feel bad. They're just, because they think I'm badge nuts. But the open badge idea was interesting to me, because a badge, Mozilla's open badge system, an issuer can represent your badge for anything. It doesn't have to be a test, and that's kind of what you're talking about. You're saying, well, the classes, we test knowledge with a test. It's the classic way to do it. But skills tend to map to experience to me. And some of the people that are in open badge are saying, well, we're a badge issuer, and we will issue badges based on your experience. And that's all they do. So there's your skill. I have proof that you've done this. And maybe that's what we're doing, is we're tracking, in our, ITS, I live in the world of consultants and implementers and all of that. So in implementers, maybe what we're doing is we're saying you have a badge for having implemented this set here, implemented this process. You can show that you've done it from front to back. There's your experience. And so that's where we'll start to track it. And once you start to track it in something like the open badge format, where everybody can see it, and then we'll issue that on LinkedIn, now I've got two of them. So I've got knowledge and skill. Now all I need is ability. And I think that's going to be the part that'll be the most interesting to see shake out. And all I can do is say, I read everything, I look everywhere, and I'm trying to figure out where that frog is going to jump. So,
cool. No, that's a good answer, and I really like the fact bringing in the open badge. What an intriguing idea. Hadn't heard of that before. So that's really great.
Right. Cool.
The other thing is that came up as a question for me is you made reference to what I would refer to as lifelong learning. Mm-hmm. As an orientation. And the thing I've noticed, especially with regards to people engaged in IT, is, and I think one of the absolute critical elements to address and change in IT organizations is getting over I think there's like almost a genetic desire to, once an IT person gets something figured out or contained, they want to keep it contained. So, change is a bad thing, because now it's like, oh, that upsets the equilibrium, as opposed to the recognition that, change is universal and takes place over time and unfolds, and we need to grow and adapt to that. What do you think about, what are the mechanisms or the things that we can do to help engender that shift in thinking, so that it becomes less of a burden and becomes more exciting to, consider that, hey, wow, things are changing. I'm continually growing and evolving and taking on what's next.
I think you're right. People will always struggle with that. It's just our nature. We like it, and to me, the trainer part that I constantly am struggling with is and trainers, we all do this, right? I'm very much of that resistant to change. I like being, as long as it's something I've done a million times, I'm really good at it. And so people know I'm really good at it, and there's my credibility, and I thrive on that. I love it when people know that I'm good at what I do. So jumping into a new class or a new anything, I've got to get into that habit. Honestly, I think maybe the disruptor there is gamification. As we make things interesting through game concepts, people start, and people think of gamification as competition, and it's not. And that's where I go back to the Coursera course on that, and Worldbox book, is gamification isn't just leaderboards and who am I beating. If you look at some of the other world is massively open online games instead of massively online open courses. Part of the element of game is that ability to explore. And from your world in training, if you've done flights, I know you're familiar with simulation. The reason we do simulation is so that you can take risks and not have penalties. And maybe that's the thing that gamification can add to change. to create change without the kinds of penalties and things that we imbue when you have a change. I get nervous about change because I don't like the penalties. But if I can simulate it in some way, if I can add the gamification where I can explore something different without having enormous consequences that are so much I don't want to take them, then I'm maybe more willing to get there and more willing to continue getting there. And that'll train me to take bigger risks. I mean, like I said, you've got the experience as a pilot and a flight instructor. Did you find that giving people ongoing simulations helps them be braver?
Well, so I wouldn't say that my goal is not actually to have them be braver, but rather to be better decision makers in the face of circumstances that are not the circumstances you want to find yourself in.
Right.
So the use of simulation is actually really good to put people into the impossible situation, like having everything fail, or controlled conditions, so that the first time you experience it, you can do it in a way where it's like, oh, stop it for a second.
Right.
What should I be thinking about here? Get the expert coaching from somebody who's been there, done that. Go back into the simulation, practice it over and over again so that it becomes a matter of behavior and response to a certain set of stimuli or a certain set of inputs, so that when the time comes to actually perform, you don't actually rely on the bad muscle memory, which is the old habit, but rather the new habit that you're developing, which embodies the ideal towards which you're training.
Right. And that makes sense. So you're using simulation to help people move past. You're really using simulation to help people get past change, because ultimately you're using them to break. And so what I'm saying is, can we take that simulation and instead of changing that reaction to muscle memory, could we build something that makes it the simulation itself encourages you to explore. It reduces the risk and gets you more willing. Now, in your case, like you said, you really wouldn't want them to go, oh, hey, let me flip this plane upside down. That should be fine. But if you build simulations to which the risk is reduced, or better, build simulations in which the risk is controlled, so they know sometimes it's okay to take this risk and this change is good, and I'm rewarded for it. I can go explore out over here, and there's a reward for it that isn't like, I'm not risking. I've worked with it, and who knows who'll be watching this, and I'm the G2, G3 simulation set. I love working with it. But when you think about it, it's very much like that. You have $18 million that you could make or not. And that kind of numbers are not the kind of numbers most of the people doing the simulation throw around every day. So if I could explore with $18 million and not have any risk, maybe I'd be more willing to start. And you do a couple of those, and I start learning, okay, I'm willing to take some more risk, but maybe not as much as we don't want you to go crazy with it.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's where one of those disruptors will help us. I think gamification would be a strong direction to help us change that method of getting us more familiar. Giving the ideas of gamification to do simulations and do exploring and be rewarded for that is a great way. So
cool. Well, I could bend your ear for hours and keep the conversation going, but for the sake of the audience and for your sake, we'll call this one done. But before we do that, I'd just like to ask you anything about the experience of presenting here. Any closing comments for you?
Wow. It's been a fantastic opportunity. As you know, and as I'm sure we'll see, we had some struggles on my end on running things, and so I can't do anything except go, I'm really sorry for the getting things set up and running them this way. I wish that I could have done it differently, and unfortunately, all I can do is go forward. But having done it and been able to do this, it just made my day. In looking through and watching the other presenters and seeing them on the stream and going back and reviewing them, it's just these people, and all of them I think are as passionate about their information as I am. It's very funny we're talking about this and the lights in my classroom are going out again. But the opportunity to do this and share something that it fires me up to talk about it, and so to share it in a format with people that I hope will listen and take this idea to the next step, it's just been fantastic for me. So I can't say how excited and how cool it was to do.
Okay. Well,
Thanks.
you did an outstanding job, and thank you for taking the time, and I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure everybody else out in the audience did as well. So TFT people, hope you enjoyed the presentation. Keep the comments coming. Use the hashtag. Find us on social media. Look forward to engaging with you guys, and hope you enjoyed the sessions, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. So with that, have a wonderful day, and we'll see you again soon. Bye for now.
Thanks, guys. See ya.
Introducing My IT from BMC Software. One quick download, and the way your users think about IT changes forever. Let's say they need a networked printer, or a Wi-Fi connection, or even a map of an office they're visiting. My IT already knows where they are, and shows them a list of available resources and services pre-configured for their devices. Or maybe your user needs help with something more complex. With My IT, they can do most things themselves. But if they can't, they can simply schedule an appointment with a technician who can. In short, My IT is built to make your IT organization more modern and your users infinitely happier, dramatically changing the perception of your services